spot it when we see it.
Name a business that has been ruined because it was over downsized. I cannot think of a single one, but if you ask me to name businesses that were half ruined or ruined by bloat, I could just rattle off name after name after name. It's gotten fashionable to assume that downsizing is wrong. Well, it may have been wrong to let the business get so fat that it eventually had to downsize. If you've got way more people than are needed in the business, I see no social benefit in having people sit around half employed or unemployed.
Historically, every industry at all times is interested in downsizing or becoming more efficient. Now, if the industry is growing, you can achieve efficiency by doing more work or turning out more output with the same people. But if you go back 150 years and look at the percentage of people in farming, for example, farming has downsized from being a very appreciable percentage of the American workforce to a very small percentage, and essentially that's released people to do other things. So it's in the interests of society to get as much output in anything as it can per unit of labor input. It's very difficult on the individual involved, and it's no fun. I guess it's no fun being a horse when the tractor comes along, or a blacksmith, and when the car comes along. But I don't quarrel with the activities. I quarrel sometimes with how it's done, and I do think there's been a certain lack of, in certain cases, some empathy or sensitivity in terms of the way it's being done. You should try to make your businesses more efficient. We hope we're not in businesses that will require us to lay off people over time, because we hope that physical output grows and that we become more productive and can keep the same number of people to get greater output. Dexter Shoe has done a great job of that over time. They've become more and more productive, but they've sold more shoes instead of selling the same number of shoes and letting people go. But sometimes industry trends, at World Book, we have fewer people than we had a year or two ago, and we don't have any answer to that. Over time, we got out of the textile business. I wish we didn't have to, but we did not know how to run a textile company in New England and compete effectively. But it is in the interests of society to do jobs more effectively. It's also in the interest of society, it seems to me, to take care in some way of the people that are affected by that activity. And either, in some cases, it may be retraining, but in other cases, it doesn't work so well if you're 55 years old and you've been working in a textile mill all your life, and all of a sudden the guy that runs the place can't make any money on it, selling your output. That's not the fellow's fault that's been working in the textile mill for 30 years. There's a balance in that. I think we want at Berkshire to do everything as efficiently as we can. Part of that, in a big way, is not taking on a lot of people we don't need. A lot of the mistakes that are being corrected now are because people got very fat, and their businesses got very fat in the past and took on all kinds of people they don't need. We see that in a lot of businesses that we're exposed to. And as long as they're very prosperous, really no one does very much about it. And when time comes, they all of a sudden find out they can get way more output. The oil companies are a classic example. People probably actually needed to produce, refine, and market oil. Probably hasn't changed that much, but if you look at the employment relative to barrels produced, refined, and marketed, it's gone down dramatically over 20 years ago. To me, it just means that they weren't being run that well 20 years ago, and it never should have occurred in the first place. You're very likely to compete against some guy at some point who doesn't have more people around than needed in the business too, but it doesn't change. For the people involved, they've got real problems.
Warren, can you name one that has been ruined by over downsizing?
At Berkshire, we do have a rule about downsizing on that. We have promised people that we will never have layoffs because of a drop in volume. We do not want the people who run our insurance business to feel they have to write X dollars in order to keep everybody there. We can afford some overhead around that's costing us a little money for lack of using it at full capacity. What we can't afford are people feeling some internal compulsion to keep writing business in order to keep their job. We love managers that have a passion for their business. And when we're buying a business, we have to ask ourselves, do they love the money or do they love the business? If they love the money, there's nothing wrong with that, but they probably wouldn't be running the business for us a year or two down the road. I think one difference is that people that create their own businesses, the entrepreneurs, probably on average would have a significantly greater degree of passion for those businesses than somebody that was just brought in a few years ago and sees themselves as making a profit in a few years on reselling the business and leaving. Charlie?
Well, it's very interesting to think about what matters most, the passion or the competence that was born in. I would argue that probably the passion is more important than the brain power.
by the time they get to us, if they were passionate but incompetent, they don't get to us. I mean, they're not going to be there unless they're competent. But the question is whether they had a passion for money or a passion for their business to some degree. And they all like money. I mean, and they like it partly because it enables them to build the business they love. But we're not going to see an incompetent but passionate manager by the time we start laying out a lot of money for a business. They got weeded out a long time ago. So I don't have to weed those out. But I do have to weed out the ones who want to cash a big paycheck and go off and do something else at some time. We see lots and lots of businesses, usually owned by financial operator types, where it's absolutely clear that, they've come in, they've leveraged it up, they've played games with the accounting, that is about run out, and they want to sell it then. And interestingly enough, fairly often those are bought by other financial operators who think they're going to play the game a second time. We are not interested in any of those at all, but what we are interested in is lunch, and we're going to have that right now. And I'll see you back